Welcome back to Hey Kentucky. Now, we've all been following the events in Las Vegas over the last couple of days and how tragic it is. And if you're like me, you've wondered, how do you respond to incidents like this? I think what's difficult about these mass shootings is how random they are. It seems like you can be anywhere and something like this can happen, whether it's at a university, whether it's at a school, or at a country music concert. And I think it leaves a lot of us feeling helpless. Look at politicians. Often when they respond, they say the exact same things. They always say that their thoughts and prayers are with the victims. And that's great. I think we all feel that way when it happens. I often end up sending out tweets that are very similar. But now is the time at some point that we have to discuss what's next. How do we fix these things? Or are they even fixable? Oftentimes when tragedies like this happen, you will see politicians or TV commentators say, now's not the time to discuss. Now's the time only to mourn. But the reality is, in current culture as it is, if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it? People move on from one thing very quickly. Think about Puerto Rico. Last week, it was all we saw on the news. Now it's barely mentioned. So when the time is right, you have to talk about it. And this is a time when mass shootings are on people's mind. I think it's time for this country to be honest about where it is with gun violence and what is happening. Because the reality is, we in America have a problem with gun violence that no one else in the world has. Take mass shootings. America leads the world in mass shooting statistics, and it's not even close. We have more mass shooting incidents in America than almost the rest of the world combined. And where other countries have mass shootings, they're often terrorism, be it of the Islamic variety or various nationalist groups in their countries. But in America, we lead the world in random acts of violence. Our mass shooting statistics, as you can see, are not close to anywhere else. And there has to be a reason. And then there's gun violence in general. I don't have to tell you that America leads the world in homicides, but also the violence continues to be more and more random. And something has to be done. Why does it happen, and why does it happen in America? I think we as a country have to look and figure out what it is that's happening. And we have to have no sacred cows. Part of the problem is, when we discuss this, people on the right and the left are stuck in their positions, and they refuse to budge without looking at the facts. Take mental illness. It is without question a huge part of the problem, especially in mass shootings. The killers almost always have some degree of mental illness, and we as a country are terrible at dealing with mental illness. About 50% of the individuals with severe psychiatric disorders in this country get no treatment at all, according to the Mental Illness Policy Center. And oftentimes, when the healthcare debate comes up, the first thing that gets struck is mental illness care. And there's no doubt that it is the one factor you see in all of these cases. Also, the culture of violence. Let's be real. We have a violent culture in the arts unlike anywhere else. Video games, movies. We see more violence than almost any other country. Some studies show that kids by the age of 18 see more violence in America than they see in the rest of the world combined. Which brings me to guns and regulations. Now, this is an issue people don't like to tackle because folks are on two sides and they often don't budge. But it is the most important part of this debate, and it's one that very rarely do people agree upon. Now, the Second Amendment is huge in America. It's not only cherished, but it's practiced by more people than any other country in the world. And it is ridiculous for folks on the left to act like you can take away guns. It's not going to happen, and it's not what the Founding Fathers wanted. But there should be some sensible regulations that everybody agrees upon. For instance, background checks. Why is it the case when you buy a gun in a store, you get a background check, but if you buy it at a gun show, you don't? I can't imagine anyone would disagree with this, and some polls say over 80% of Americans are for universal background checks. Plus, I don't see how there are certain weapons that are ever really needed. Do you really need ammunition silencers? Do you really need high-capacity magazines with 30 or more rounds? Hunters don't use them, so why in the world should the average citizen have them? Solutions like this are things that both sides should agree upon. Unfortunately, people are so scared to give even an inch that they won't agree to regulations that otherwise they would think are normal. And most of that is because of the NRA. It's the highest powerful advocacy group in the country, and politicians are without question bought and sold by them. And we have to know that in order to get common sense regulations. But let me say this, and I think it's important. We don't know that these gun regulations will stop any of this. Oftentimes, members of the left will say, you know what? If you get rid of these guns, these won't happen. But that may not be true. The reality is this is a complicated issue and one that needs to be studied. Now, our Governor Matt Bevin sent out a tweet after this happened that said you couldn't regulate evil. Well, I completely disagree with that. We regulate evil all the time. Think about when you get into an airport. The first thing you do is go through security. Why? You have a right to fly, but we want to prevent harm. The same thing is true with auto safety. You have a right to drive. However, you have to get a license and various preventative measures. Does Governor Matt Bevin really believe that only in the areas of guns should you have no preventative measures? I can't imagine that's the case. The reality is it's now time for our country to take responsible people and figure out what we can do. In 1996, Australia dealt with a similar thing. They had the Port Arthur massacre, which shocked the country, and they decided as a nation, we're going to stop this. They brought people from all sides together and came up with a plan. It included some gun regulations, some mental health care, and some added security around the country. And since then, they've seen gun deaths get cut in half, and they've had no mass shootings. Now, that won't necessarily work here. Our gun protections are higher here. But the idea is one we have to try. We've seen Columbine, we've seen Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech, Orlando, and Las Vegas. We as a country are better than this. I don't know if there is any solution to stop this. People who believe they know for sure are wrong. But I do know this. This country is too great to let it keep happening and do nothing and just throw its hands up. We have to make changes, and we have to start now.